Hi, I'm Zoe, your future marine biologist, with a passion for uncovering the ocean's mysteries. Did you know that only 5 of the ocean has been mapped and explored? That means there's still a chance megalodon might exist or that mermaids could be real. What do you think? Before we dive into the deep end to explore that question, don't forget to like and subscribe to join me on this wild oceanic journey. Taking up my dream course at an elite university with the coolest professors was everything I'd ever hoped for. My college life was practically perfect. And of course, what's school life without a secret crush? Enter Jace nonchalant, incredibly smart, and the guy who sat next to me in a few classes. With his attractive looks and chill vibes, he was a walking daydream. We had small interactions here and there, each one sending a storm through my tummy. Sometimes our elbows would accidentally touch or our fingers would brush while picking something up. One time, during a boring lecture, I doodled a little sea creature in my notebook. Jace leaned over and said, "Nice drawing, maybe you should add a shark." Blushing, I quickly sketched a tiger shark. He gave me a thumbs up, and it made my entire day. Another time, I accidentally spilled coffee on his notebook. "Oopsie, sorry about that. My reflexes are so uncooperative sometimes," I apologized. Jace just smirked. "Great, now my notes are caffeinated. Maybe they'll wake up before I do." His lazy smile and nonchalant attitude were endearing to say the least. These moments with him made my life simple and peaceful until a mysterious woman came along and turned everything upside down. It all started when my favorite professor didn't show up to class one day. Instead, the door creaked open and a mysterious figure glided in. We collectively held our breath as she stepped into the light. She was ethereal, cascading waves of red hair, shimmering ocean-like eyes. She looked like the queen of Atlantis. "Hello, class," she greeted with a melodic voice. "My name is Miss Marina, and I'll be your temporary teacher while Professor Munchkins is on a month-long vacation." For a moment the room remained spellbound. I was caught in her charm too, until clarity snapped me back. She looked too young to be a teacher, maybe in her late 20s. I leaned closer to Jace and whispered, "Doesn't she remind you of a mermaid?" He smirked. Nice imagination. Miss Marina's enchanting presence wasn't just in her appearance. She spoke in a way that felt. "All right, class, let's dive into the mysteries of the ocean." Dive. My ears perked up. Her strange behaviors began piling up, her constant. I even noticed how often she called on Jace, her gaze lingering on him with unsettling intensity. I became obsessed with the idea that Miss Marina might be a mermaid or worse, a siren trying to lure Jace away. My suspicions hit a peak during our school camping trip by the lake. While she dazzled everyone with her seashell jewelry and mysterious aura, she refused to join any water activities. "I have a severe allergy to chlorine and sea salt," she explained. "Convenient," I muttered to myself. Determined to expose her, I orchestrated a series of accidents to get her wet, spilling drinks, tripping near her, but she dodged every attempt with an almost inhuman grace. Things took a dramatic turn when I stumbled upon a hidden underwater tunnel by the lake. Convinced it led to her secret lair, I dragged Jace along to investigate. Inside the eerie tunnel we found old artifacts, fish bones, and letters hinting at a deep. But before we could explore further, Miss Marina appeared, accompanied by the school principal. "This tunnel is part of an old irrigation system," she explained, her calm tone unnerving me. Later that night I awoke to find Jace sleepwalking toward the lake, drawn by an eerie humming. I shook him awake just in time, and together we confronted Miss Marina. "You're a mermaid, aren't you?" I demanded. Her melodic laugh sent shivers down my spine. "Zoe, you have quite the imagination." The next day Miss Marina called Jace and me into her office. I braced for her to admit the truth about being a mermaid, but the revelation she dropped was even more shocking. "Jace," she began, "I'm your mother." "What?" Jace and I exclaimed in unison. She explained her long absence, her regrets, and how she'd been watching over Jace from afar. She even presented proof, old photos, documents, and a DNA test. Jace was stunned. "You abandoned me and Dad," he said, his voice shaking. "I was young, scared, and made a terrible mistake," she admitted. But something still felt off. Miss Marina's eagerness to reconnect with Jace seemed too perfect. My suspicions were confirmed when I discovered her true identity. When Jace confronted his dad, he learned the full story. Miss Marina, or Laura, had once been his stepmother. After being caught trying to steal the family's fortune, she disappeared, only to resurface years later with a new identity. Her final act of deception involved locking Jace in a gas-filled room, but I managed to save him just in time. She was arrested shortly after, and the truth about her schemes made headlines. Despite everything, Jace and I grew closer through the ordeal. One day, he surprised me. "How about we go back to the lake this weekend for some real mermaid hunting? Are you asking me out on a date?" "Maybe," I screamed internally as he walked away with a mischievous grin. And as we sat by the lake that weekend, I swear I saw a glimpse of something in the water, a flash of scales, a shimmer of a tail. "Did you see that?" I gasped. "See what?" Jace teased, smirking. Maybe it was my imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, the ocean still held secrets waiting to be discovered. The thick forest air hummed with an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. Arya, gripping the leather-bound journal, stepped cautiously over gnarled roots and jagged rocks. The journal's worn pages fluttered slightly in the wind, as though urging her to hurry. Its cryptic symbols and drawings had led her this far, to a forest untouched by time, where even the sunlight seemed reluctant to enter. Beside her, Urin muttered a string of arcane words, fingers tracing a glowing sigil in the air. He was a scholar of the old world's forgotten magics, drawn to the journal's promise of unlocking long-lost knowledge. But he wasn't the only one. Intrigued others had noticed their pursuit, and Arya couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. "We're close," Urin said finally, his voice tinged with excitement. His glasses reflected the faint, pulsating glow from the enchanted map he carried. The map's lines shifted as though alive, revealing new details with each step. The ruins should be just ahead. Arya nodded but kept her hand close to her dagger. Trusting Urin was one thing, but trusting the world they were stepping into was another. Every step forward brought them deeper, into the unknown, a place where the journal hinted that reality bent, and rules no longer applied. The clearing appeared abruptly, as if summoned. Massive stone pillars jutted from the ground at odd angles, covered in moss and ancient runes. The air felt heavier here, crackling with an unseen energy. In the center of the ruins stood a stone altar, its surface intricately carved with the same symbols as the journal. "This is it," Urin whispered, stepping forward with reverence. Arya stayed back, scanning the perimeter. Her instincts screamed that they weren't alone. Her gaze darted to the treeline, where shadows moved unnaturally. She tightened her grip on her weapon. "Rin, we're not the only ones here," she said, her voice low. Rin looked up, alarm flashing across his face. Before he could speak, the shadows emerged, figures cloaked in dark robes, their faces hidden. Each carried a staff that pulsed with an ominous red light. "You've come far," one of them said, their voice hollow and distorted. "But the knowledge you seek belongs to us." Arya stepped between Rin and the figures, dagger drawn. "Funny, the journal didn't mention gatekeepers," she said, her tone defiant. The lead figure raised their staff. "Leave now, or face the consequences." Rin clenched his fists, his scholarly demeanor replaced with determination. "That journal was left behind for someone who could decipher it. We've done the work, and we're not turning back." The tension thickened as the opposing forces stood their ground. Suddenly the altar began to glow, its carvings lighting up one by one. The light grew brighter, casting the entire clearing in an ethereal glow. The robed figures hesitated, their focus shifting to the altar. "It's awakening," one of them muttered. Rin seized the moment. "Arya, now!" She didn't need to be told twice. Arya darted toward the altar, her dagger slicing through the air as she deflected a bolt of red energy from one of the attackers. The journal in her other hand seemed to react, its pages turning wildly on their own. As she reached the altar, the ground beneath it began to quake. Symbols lifted off the stone and hovered in midair, forming a swirling vortex of light and runes. Rin shouted something, but his words were lost in the cacophony of sound and energy. The vortex expanded, pulling at everything around it. Arya clung to the altar, her heart pounding. She felt the journal grow warm in her hands, and then a blinding flash consumed everything. When Arya opened her eyes, she was no longer in the forest. Instead, she stood in a vast, glowing expanse where the ground shimmered like liquid silver, and the sky was an endless gradient of blues and purples. Floating islands hovered in the distance, connected by glowing bridges of light. Rin appeared beside her, dazed but unharmed. He looked around in awe. "We've crossed over," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Where are we?" Arya asked, clutching the journal tightly. "The realm of knowledge," Rin replied, his eyes wide. The journal wasn't just a guide, it was a key. As they took in their surreal surroundings, a towering figure materialized before them, its form composed entirely of light. It spoke in a voice that resonated in their minds. "You have entered the library eternal, but knowledge has a price." Meanwhile, back in the forest, the robed figures regrouped, their leader staring at the now dormant altar. "They've made it through," one of them said. The leader nodded grimly. "Then we must follow. They cannot be allowed to harness its power unchecked." The clearing fell silent once more, but the game was far from over. The figure of light loomed over Arya and Rin, its presence as overwhelming as the glowing expanse around them. Though its form lacked facial features, its energy pulsed with a consciousness far beyond their understanding. "You have entered the library eternal," it repeated, its voice resonating like a symphony in their minds. "Few mortals have stood where you now stand. Knowledge is your reward, but only if you prove yourselves worthy." Arya tightened her grip on the journal, feeling its warmth pulse through her hands. The book, now alive with golden light, seemed to hum in anticipation. She exchanged a wary glance with Rin, whose eyes burned with the curiosity that had driven him this far. "What kind of trial are we facing?" Rin asked, his voice steady but tinged with awe. The figure extended an arm, and the shimmering ground beneath them began to shift. Pillars of light erupted in a circle, each inscribed with shifting runes that flickered like flames. A great chasm opened beyond the circle, its depths swirling with darkness that seemed to devour light itself. "To access the knowledge of the eternal library, you must confront your truths," the figure intoned. "Only those who know themselves can wield the knowledge of all worlds without falling to ruin. Step forward." Arya and Rin hesitated. This place felt alive, watching them with an awareness that sent chills down their spines. Arya took a step toward the circle, her voice steady. "If this is the price of knowledge, we'll face it." Rin followed, though his hands trembled slightly. "We've come too far to turn back now." As they stepped into the circle, the world around them dissolved. The radiant expanse was replaced by a suffocating darkness that pressed against their skin. Then, slowly, images began to emerge as though pulled from their deepest memories. Arya found herself standing in a familiar scene, the smoldering ruins of her childhood village. The acrid scent of smoke filled her lungs, and the cries of the wounded echoed around her. She saw herself as a young girl, clutching her brother's hand as they fled from raiders. But this time the scene was different. Her brother was no longer with her. A voice low and cruel whispered in her ear, "You survived by leaving him behind." "No," Arya said, her voice shaking. "I didn't leave him. I tried to save him, But you failed, the voice interrupted. And you've been running ever since, chasing answers in journals and ruins, hoping to silence the guilt. The scene shifted again, this time showing her as she was now clutching the glowing journal. In the distance, the shadowy figures of the raiders loomed, their eyes glowing red. If you cannot confront this, they will consume you, the voice warned. Rin's trial was no less harrowing. He stood in a grand, crumbling library, his sanctuary in the old world. The shelves towered around him, filled with books he had devoted his life to studying. But as he reached for one, the pages disintegrated into ash. "You have always sought knowledge," a voice said, echoing from the shadows. "But to what end?" Rin turned, his heart pounding. "To understand, to preserve what's been lost." "Or to control," the voice countered. The shadows coalesced into a figure resembling himself, but older and worn, with eyes that burned with desperation. "You fear irrelevance, you hoard knowledge, not to share it, but to prove your worth." "I've never—" Rin began, but the figure advanced, pointing an accusing finger. "Can you truly bear the weight of all you seek to uncover, or will it destroy you as it has destroyed so many before?" The trials reached their zenith as the figures of light and shadow closed in on them. Arya, standing amidst the flames of her past, felt the raiders closing in. But this time she didn't run. She gripped the journal tightly and faced them, shouting, "I've made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right. I won't let the past define me." The flames roared higher, then extinguished, leaving her standing alone in the clearing, the journal glowing brighter than ever. Rin, meanwhile, stood his ground against his shadow self. "I don't fear knowledge," he said firmly. "And I won't use it selfishly. I'll honor it by sharing it, by protecting it from those who would abuse it." The shadow figure dissolved into mist, and the library around him reformed, more vibrant and alive than before. The trials ended, and the glowing expanse returned. Arya and Rin stood together once more, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The towering figure of light reappeared, its form now brighter, almost blinding. "You have faced yourselves and emerged whole," it said. "The knowledge of the library eternal is yours to claim, but remember, knowledge is not power, it is responsibility." The journal in Arya's hands transformed, its pages now filled with maps, diagrams, and writings in a language she could suddenly understand. Rin's enchanted map glowed with new pathways, revealing the locations of forgotten artifacts and hidden wisdom. But before they could celebrate, the air around them repelled. The robed figures from the forest appeared, their leader raising a staff. "You've opened the door," the leader snarled, "but you won't leave here alive." Arya and Rin exchanged a look. They had survived trials of the mind and spirit, now it was time to fight for their survival. The battle that followed was fierce and chaotic, with bolts of magic and bursts of light illuminating the ethereal realm. Rin used his newfound knowledge to weave protective barriers and strike at their enemies, while Arya darted between them with precision, her dagger striking true. In the end the robed figures fell, their leader collapsing with a cry of anguish. The library eternal's guardian watched impassively, its light dimming slightly. "Go now," it said. "You have claimed your prize, but remember this knowledge binds you. Use it wisely, or it will be your undoing." As they stepped back into the forest, the ruins around them faded, leaving no trace of the portal they had entered. The journal glowed faintly in Arya's hands, a constant reminder of their journey. "We did it," Rin said, though his voice carried the weight of everything they had faced. Arya nodded, her gaze on the horizon. "This is just the beginning." Together they walked into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next, armed not just with knowledge, but with the strength to wield it wisely. And so their story became a legend, whispered in the halls of scholars and the fireside tales of adventurers. A tale of courage, truth, and the eternal quest for understanding.